Colin Cowherd and Joel Klatt on Nick Saban's retirement. Huge news coming out of Tuscaloosa. The greatest coach in college football history, as far as I'm concerned, has retired. Some of these stats are absolutely insane. 292, 71, and 1 as a college head coach. 0 losing seasons in 28 years. 31 bowl appearances. 11 and 1 in SEC championship games. 7 national championships. No class Saban ever recruited at Alabama went 4 years without winning a national championship. And 15 consecutive seasons where Alabama spent at least 1 week at number 1. With the landscape of college football changing with NILs and all of that, we'll probably never see a stretch like this again from any coach or any team as dominant as Saban was. And we'll talk about that in this video. We'll also talk about who I think will replace him. And I'll give you a little spoiler. The person who everyone thinks it is, I don't think it makes any sense for that person to go to Alabama.
The first name last night that came up, and we both know him and we both like him, is Sark to replace Saban. He's been there before.
I thought they were going to say Dan Lanning. So Dan Lanning is who I first heard. Now, I know the news has changed a little bit since this all first was reported. But to me, Dan Lanning makes no sense, or made no sense, because it sounds like he's staying in Oregon. But if you think about how college football is changing now, Oregon might be the best job in the country with the Phil Knight money, the ability to really go after NIL and really get aggressive with the transfer portal. Alabama is kind of built by Saban. Without Saban, Alabama to me isn't as attractive of a destination. And I know Alabama wants a guy from the quote tree, someone who has been there or has ties to the program. Lanning was there for 1 year. He was a GA like 9 years ago. So that makes no sense. Now, Sark is someone else who I thought might go. Sark's in a pretty good position, though. I'm not sure if, unless he just wants to, I'm not sure if Sark would be the guy. I think Mike Norvell is a name. Lane Kiffin, obviously, is a name you'll hear a lot about. Some people have thrown around James Franklin. That would be a disaster hire. I don't think that is possible at all. And then Dabo Swinney. Dabo's problem, though, is he fits everything except the recency. Recent times have seen Dabo kind of fall off, and he's fallen off because he doesn't like NIL. He doesn't attack the transfer portal, and he's kind of falling behind the current landscape of how college football is. College football is not the 12-team playoff and the transfer and the NIL. That is a very different system than what coaches like Nick Saban and Jim Harbaugh, what they bought into. This is closer to a mini NFL. And I'm not surprised at all that a lot of these coaches are taking this time to either leave the game or retire or restructure or move around. The landscape is different for fans and players, but we sometimes don't think about the coaches and what it all means for them. And this is a reflection of that. I think Saban might have stuck around again if everything was the same and he was in his system, but this new system doesn't really benefit him in his style as well, I don't think.
He understands the intensity. I don't buy it. I think Texas has a better NIL. What did you make of the suggestion Sark to Bama? Did you buy it?
Well, he's the name that you have to call first. So whether he's going to take it or not, that's the name that you have to start with. And it's because he has every single box that they want to check off. He is a very strong recruiter. He's got a long history of being a head coach. And frankly, and people don't want to admit this, he was successful at every place, even through the disaster that was his time at USC. He's got a history at Alabama. And then here's a note that I don't think many people realize about Steve Sarkeesian. A few years ago, he was in line and offered a job that he wanted to take. And he went to tell Coach Saban that was his.
Think about if you're Sark, though, okay? And let's take away the possibility that he just, it's a dream job. Because if it's a dream job, it's hard to quantify that. And no one really knows that except the individual, so there's no point in factoring that in. But take that away. Let's just look at the two jobs. Where would you rather be, Texas or Alabama? As a coach, as a human, as someone trying to win, where would you rather be? I'd rather be at Texas. I just don't think Alabama, without Saban, is as attractive as a job as people are making it out to be. I mean, Texas, bigger city, no hate to Tuscaloosa, but Austin versus Tuscaloosa, the NIL money bigger at Texas, same conference. For Sark, you have your quarterback, you have Quinn Ewers, you have been recruiting, you're getting good recruiting classes, you're making strides in the program. There's not this huge, outrageous expectations for whoever follows Saban. If you follow Saban, think about Alabama. If they lose 3 games, it's an absolute disaster, right? If you go to the Peach Bowl or whatever, it's considered a failure. If you don't have a top 5 recruiting class, it's considered a failure. So why would a coach like Sark, who's got a great situation, or Dan Lanning, or a couple of these other guys, even Lane Kiffin, why would you want to leave that and go to Alabama in the riskiest move possible? So Sark does make sense for everyone except Sark. Same with Lanning. Lanning does check boxes, but why would he do it? Sark checks boxes, but why would he do it?
His intention, and Coach Saban said, no, that's not what you're going to do. You're going to be the next coach here. Nick Saban, I believe, had every intention to go the Bob Stoops or Urban Meyer route with Alabama and Steve Sarkeesian. That had worked so well at Oklahoma and clearly had been working at Ohio State, and he wanted to keep Sark around. Now, it just so happened that Texas opened up, and that's one of those jobs that everybody acknowledges. Yes, go ahead and go do that there.
Yeah.
So now that he's at Texas, he doesn't make a lot of sense to go back to Alabama because he's his own man at Texas.
Yeah.
He has built this in his own image. He's not in the shadow or footsteps of anybody else. This is Sark's program. If you go to Alabama, you will be in Nick Saban's shadow. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Yeah.
And that's a big shadow. There's 2 names that I think make sense. Norvell, because Florida State is getting hit with sanctions and the ACC, Florida State problems right now, the conference realignment and whatnot. This would be a good time. Norvell probably is at the peak of how people perceive him. It'd be a good time to go ahead and get out of Florida State. You did a lot there. He did turn it around. I'll give him credit. Great job at Florida State. He goes to Bama. For him, it's a step up. For him, it does make sense. Whereas Sark and Lanning, their situations are great. Florida State situation is nowhere near as good as Oregon or Texas. Florida State situation is about as shaky as it can be. You and your conference don't get along. You're trying to get out of your conference. You're getting sanctions. You're losing players. They're losing a ton of players to the NFL. If I was Norvell, I would absolutely listen to Alabama, and I would want the job. The other one is Urban Meyer, because Urban Meyer has nothing to lose. Urban Meyer has, he doesn't have a current coaching job. It's his way to get back into coaching. And he is stepping into Saban's shadow to a certain extent, but he's also his own guy. Urban Meyer is a made man in college football, so he's not going to come in there and, if Ken DeBoer from Washington went to Alabama, he's under the shadow of Nick Saban. It is, can you progress as a coach to be Nick Saban? Urban Meyer isn't under that same lens. Urban Meyer is already, on the Mount Rushmore, a very long Mount Rushmore, not top 4, maybe a top 12. So multiple faces on the Mount Rushmore. But he's on that Mount Rushmore of college football head coaches. So if he comes in, a couple years there, it gets him back into coaching. It gives him a nice, cushy place to go to land a big job, a chance to win. Urban is a figure in the game. He would be able to recruit. Urban will lean into NIL and the transfer portal, all that stuff. He doesn't have any ties, and I guess that is a problem if you're from Alabama, because Bama wants to have someone from the tree. But I would look at those 2 guys. Those are the 2 that make the most sense to me. Urban is a bit of a pipe dream because he's not coaching. Anytime you're trying to get someone who's not currently doing the job, it's always difficult. But Norvell or Urban Meyer make the most sense for everyone involved, for the coach and the school.
He's the greatest college football coach of all time. So for that reason, even though they have to start with Sark and they like him, and clearly Nick liked him enough that he wanted to promote him from within a couple of years ago, I don't think Sark is wanting that job.
By the way, so I agree with you, Dan.
Yeah, I agree. Sark is would probably listen just out of respect to Bama and out of respect to Saban, but I don't think he would take the job.
Lanning has said no. I didn't think Dan was quite ready for it. He is 0-3 against Kalen DeBoer in the Northwest, and he had better players and a better collective than Kalen DeBoer, who I think's the best coach, but he's not from the South. Your thoughts on that?
I've heard a lot about that too, like this regional idea. I'm not so sure that being from the South really matters with the new landscape of NIL and transfer. Everything is so, it really is a like continental league. Like college football is, before, it would take a lot for a quarterback from Washington to go all the way down to, Mississippi State. But now with the way that transfer is and the way that NIL deals are and the way that, there's so much fluidity, I don't think you necessarily have to have regional ties to a school. Not like how it was before. 20 years ago, you wanted to dominate the recruiting in a certain area. You wanted to dominate a region of recruiting to make your school good. That was huge, to be able to have that footprint to bring the recruits from your area. Now, you're bringing recruits from everywhere. You're bringing recruits from the entire United States. It's not as important to be as regionally proficient as it was back in the day.
So as Washington and Oregon now go into the Big Ten, I think Kalen DeBoer is better fit at Washington or eventually a Michigan or Ohio State. But I have been told Kalen DeBoer changed agents to Jimmy Sexton. That's an SEC guy. What is the latest you hear or think about that situation?
Also, filming this on a Friday, but Kalen DeBoer was supposed to be at a radio show in Washington, I believe Friday morning, canceled his appearance. So a lot of people believe it's because he's taking a call or doing an interview or going down to Tuscaloosa. DeBoer makes sense from Alabama and kind of from DeBoer too. Has he reached his peak at Washington? Him and Penix kind of finished their story. Penix is leaving, so he does kind of have to retool. A lot of his best players are leaving. So for him, this would be a good moment to take that next jump. But man, is that risky. Because like I said, the expectations are just so high. A coach like DeBoer, he is a good coach, but being a good coach or having a good year or even an exceptional year, if you aren't winning championships and winning SEC titles, it's a failure. So for someone as young as DeBoer, I would sit and I would continue getting better, continue kind of solidifying my time, my legacy at Washington. And then in a couple years, maybe the Alabama thing reopens with whoever replaces Saban. Because more than likely, whoever replaces Saban, unless they hit a home run, more than likely that person is going to fail. It's such a difficult position. It's such a difficult job. Even if Urban Meyer goes there and succeeds to an extent, how long will he be there, right? So I think DeBoer is young enough to bide his time and wait. It might not be the best interest for him to go now. And I know a lot of people don't like the idea of like using following excellence or not wanting to follow excellence as a reason to stay somewhere, but you do have to factor that in.
Well, I'll tell you what I know and what I think. So let me start with what I think. My belief was that this needed to work very quickly. I was told that this was going to happen within 72 hours, regardless of name, that they wanted to move quickly so that they could solidify the locker room. And the longer this goes.
So quick note, they did tell the current Alabama players, this is a report, that they told the players, give them 72 hours before they announce any kind of transfers or anything like that. So I think, like Klatt's saying, they do want to get this figured out within 3-4 days of Saban leaving so that they can start recruiting, so that they can keep, because again, with transfers and NILs and whatnot, if this goes too long, the current players they have there, they're gone. And I don't blame them. You don't want to sit there and wait for a coach you don't even know.
And the more no's that you hear from other, let me not get on a tangent. They want to move quickly. So for me, the list was 3 names. You start with Sark. It's immediate. You know him. You can offer him the job. If he says no, which I assume that he has, then you move to Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning has now said no. And then the third name on that list is Kalen DeBoer. And the reason is because the other names that would be prominent on that list, names like a Dabo Swinney or a Ryan Day or a Lincoln Riley or a Kirby Smart. Like, they don't make a lot of sense for one reason or another, but Kalen DeBoer does. He's 104-12 as a head coach.
Crazy.
He's excellent. It's wild how successful he has been, and you're exactly right. He did more with a lesser roster than even Lanning did at Oregon. So this guy is a guy that I think has been looking quietly. One of the reasons I think that he has been looking is not anything negative about Washington other than he's not working right now for the person that hired him.
Right.
Jen Cohen was the athletic director that hired him at Washington. She's now the athletic director at USC. And so for Kalen DeBoer, who hires Jimmy Sexton, now he can be really in the middle of all the SEC conversation. And then we get to Sexton, and this is what I do know.
I think DeBoer would take the job. I do. He just seems like the kind of guy that would take the challenge. He wouldn't be dismayed by following Saban. I think the timing makes sense. So if offered to him, I can see him taking it. I'd be wary if I was him. Obviously, the agent change, obviously the radio show, disappearance, like all that does lead to, okay, he might be taking this job. And like Klatt said, I wouldn't waste my time calling Kirby Smart. I wouldn't waste my time calling Lincoln Riley. Like, these guys are hard set in where they are, right? Like, Lincoln Riley was given basically governorship of California to go to USC. Kirby Smart is good where he's at. Even like Lane Kiffin. Do you really want Lane? Let's not even waste the call. Let's try and get this done in 72 hours. Okay, let's target, Sark, Lanning. No. All right, boom. Now we got it figured out with DeBoer, Urban, or Norvell.
Jimmy Sexton is going to control this search, every bit of it, because he controls every chess piece on the board. He represents Steve Sarkeesian. He represents Dan Lanning. He represents Kalen DeBoer. He represents Mike Norvell at Florida State, Dabo Swinney at Clemson, at James Franklin at Penn State. So he will try to slow play this as long as Alabama will allow him, so that he can get every one of his clients the raise that they feel like they deserve. So he's going to try to play it slow. Alabama's going to try to go quickly. In my estimation, the most logical candidate in terms of the expediency of the way that they want to operate is Kalen DeBoer. I'm actually going to be pretty surprised if Kalen DeBoer is not the next coach at Alabama.
All right, Joel Klatt, very, very good insight, very well connected.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know what you think. If you're an Alabama fan or even not, just who do you think will be the next coach of Alabama? Who do you want to see as the next coach of Alabama? And where do I get that hat, Joel Klatt? Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.